Howdy, today on Living Science we're looking at desalination. So the science understandings you're going to look at reverse osmosis is a filtration technique whereby water is forced under pressure through a semi-permeable membrane. Explain how reverse osmosis produces potable water from saline water. And desalination is a process used to remove minerals from saline water and produce fresh potable water. Reverse osmosis and thermal distillation are two widely used methods for distillation. Describe the disadvantages of using disadvantage for the reduction of potable water. So what is desalination? Desalination is the removal of salt, salin, from water, so desalination. And that makes the water drinkable, and another word for drinkable is potable. Desalination can be used to make ocean water, which is very plentiful, into water that is safe for drinking, which can be scarce. Now, Adelaide has a desalination plant because we had a big drought a few years ago, and the state government decided to build a desalination plant so that we could take water from the ocean, which we have plenty of, turn it into fresh water that we could use in Adelaide. That would reduce our impact on the environment by using less environmental water flows. There's two methods of desalinating. There's the reverse osmosis, which is being shown here, and there's using distillation over here. We're going to go through those in a bit of detail. So before we talk about reverse osmosis, we should talk about what osmosis is. So osmosis is a naturally occurring process where water moves across a semi-permeable membrane from a region of low solute concentration to high solute concentration. So if we have a look at a little animation down here. So in this case we're using sugar as our solute, but we'll be talking about salt. So on this side we've got lots of sugar, on this side we have none. So water moves across a semi-permeable membrane. So this is a membrane that has lots of small holes in it that water can pass through, but other substances can't. The water passes from the region of low solute concentration here, where there's low sugar, to the region where there's high. This is a naturally occurring process. It doesn't require any output of energy other than the thermal energy that's present in the solution. And this is why you can't drink salt water, because if you drink salt water, then you're increasing the amount of salt in your blood, and the water from your cells will flow through to try and balance out that salt concentration. So that means the cells in your body start to shrink, and that's dehydration. So down here I have an animation showing this, and thanks to Rhys Lewis, as always, for the video. So here we have a red blood cell. We've got our solution, our blood. Now we've put some salt in, that's the blue spheres, and we can see that as the salt goes in, the water comes out of the red blood cell, and that causes them to shrink. Now it's not just red blood cells that will shrink, it's all the cells that will shrink, and that can be quite damaging to health. So reverse osmosis is where we're reversing this process. So whereas naturally the low concentration water would flow through, we're applying pressure to the salty water in this case, and we're forcing the water through the semi-permeable membrane, and we're leaving behind the salt and the other suspended particles and matter. So on the way through we get pure water. Now this is done on a large scale using these spiral membranes, and this is a picture of a spiral membrane I took when I was at the desalination plant. So rather than having just one membrane and having high pressure water on one side and low pressure water on the other, you have lots of membranes set together. The water flows through, and that's your salty water. It gets forced into the central hole here, and that's where your fresh water collects. So the salty water stays on the outside, your fresh water collects on the inside. They're packed into these really long tubes, and those long tubes have several of these spiral membranes inside there. At one end you have the water being pumped under high pressure, and at the other end the water is at lower pressure. They can reuse some of the energy from the high pressure water though to regenerate energy in an effort to make it more efficient. So here's a little model of the setup in Adelaide. So there's lots and lots of these stacks of reverse osmosis high pressure tubes. So the white cylindrical tubes are under high pressure. The salty water is fed in at one end, and at the other end the water is collected, and that's of lower salt concentration. The water in Adelaide at the desalination plant, because of the large amount of boron can be quite toxic to plants. The water passes through these membranes twice. So it goes through once and it goes through again, and that leaves you with very clean water on the other side. So a different process to desalinate water is called thermal distillation, and this is what I used to have in my lab when I'd make distilled water. You take your salty water and you heat it, and when you heat it, the water evaporates, and that leaves the salt behind. So the salt gets left behind, the water evaporates, then you cool down that water, and the water that you've cooled down from the gas is fresh water. This is done in several stages in order to make it more efficient. This is a very useful process. We have lots of waste heat available, or cheap electricity. If you can do both of those, then this is a good process to do. We don't do this in Australia because our energy isn't cheap, and we don't have as much waste heat available to do this from industrial processes. So just saying again, you heat up your salty water, the water evaporates, the water that has evaporated has no salt in it, you cool down that water vapor and you get fresh water out of it. Now we need to talk about the disadvantages of desalination. It's very energy intensive, so to pump up that water to high pressure, that requires a lot of energy. In South Australia we use renewable energy to do that at our desalination plant. The plant itself doesn't generate too much renewable energy, but the energy to run it is bought from wind farms or solar panels. So that way it's reducing the environmental effect. If you're doing thermal distillation, you need large amounts of heat energy, and again you can do that if you have cheap fossil fuels available or cheap electricity. But if you're using fossil fuels to generate your heat energy, you're producing carbon dioxide, and that has an impact in terms of global warming. Another disadvantage is it's very expensive in order to set up a desalination plant. So the desalination plant in Adelaide costs about $1.8 billion Australian to make. And there's large ongoing costs, so you have to replace those membranes, you have to pay workers. There's only 25 workers on the site at any time, but those workers are very highly specialised. The power costs are quite high, and like I said, just ongoing maintenance and so on, that can be quite expensive. Our desalination plant is designed to run for about 100 years. So if we compare the cost of desalinated water, which is our green one over here, compared to just surface water, so this is water that flows into rivers, into reservoirs, we can see it's much, much more expensive per unit. Some other disadvantages is that the wastewater produced is very, very highly saline, and if you don't release that back into the ocean safely, you can affect the marine organisms. Another issue is that water inlets can suck in organisms that causes damage to the organisms if they get sucked into the process. Now, some of this is being mitigated in Adelaide. We'll start with the outlet pipes. So the outlet pipes go out about 1.6 kilometres out to sea. When the water is kicked out, it's kicked out under really high pressure and high force, and that makes it spread and mix in with the ocean water very, very quickly. So the water nearby the outlet is back to normal salination levels very, very quickly. So there's not enough chance for it to cause damage to the environment. In order to prevent the inlets sucking in organisms, it's gravity fed. So the water that goes into the inlet, it just falls down under gravity. So because of that, they don't get many organisms going in at all. The lady who gave us the tour said they have a wheelie bin there to collect the initial large particles or initial large things that go into the plant. And they fill that wheelie bin, she said, about once every 3 months or so. So by doing some nifty design features, you can reduce these problems. Some advantages to desalination though. The reason why we built this really expensive plant that produces really expensive but clean water is because we went through a really long drought. So from about 2006 through to 2011, it didn't rain much in South Australia. And that meant we used lots of water from the River Murray to provide our drinking water in Adelaide, and our reservoirs of surface water, they started running low. So because of that, we had to reduce our amount of water that we were using, and it was very damaging to the environment. So by setting up a desalination plant, we could become more climate independent when it came to water. If you're using the desalinated water, then your environmental freshwater demand decreases, so you can leave more water in the River Murray, which is better for the organisms there. The water produced from desalination is very, very, very clean. In fact, they have to add in salts back to it to make it more palatable to drink. In some countries where they do desalination, they don't do that step very well, and the water produced is too clean. If the water is too clean and doesn't have enough salt in it, then that can cause cells in the body to swell due to osmosis, like we saw before. In this case, the low solute concentration water is the water you're drinking in, and that can cause big issues. So over there, they drink energy drinks which contain salt in order to balance that out. So you get a reliable water source, and there are movements in the industry towards greater efficiency. So they use energy recovery devices in the desalination plant to try and recover back a lot of the energy that's used to pump the water up to high pressure. So it is able to be made more efficient, and as time goes on, the technology will get better. So today on Flipping Science, we looked at desalination. That's it for Flipping Science today. See ya.